Well, we don't want to talk about the 2023 Guardians at this point, obviously. So we can talk about the 2024 draft, right, Willie? Tank for Nick Kurtz is on. Here we go. Let's talk about the 2024 draft. Now the Guardians can get Nick Kurtz. No, we're going to talk about the 2023 draft and all the things that happened for the Guardians. Haven't had a chance to do it yet because Willie and my schedule didn't really match up last week because Willie decided to take a vacation or put off his work for another week because we found out there is no such thing as a vacation. It's only work you're not doing till next week, right?
Absolutely true. I just ended up with twice the work to do this week.
Yeah, that's what you wanted, but the draft was a nice little respite for you, right?
Absolutely. I completely forgot about work for a little while.
Yeah, as we all try to do. Hopefully we can all forget about this Guardian season, the way things have been going, even though they're hanging around 500. It's just because the division stinks. I think we need to get over that fact. But, okay, so we never really did spend a lot of time talking about Ralphy Velazquez, obviously, because I don't know why we didn't, because you brought him up a couple times in our DMs just talking about him over the last few months, and we didn't really, talk about him a ton, but we talked about him enough where we probably should have brought him up on the podcast originally, but we did not. So why did we not talk about him? I guess is that my fault? Did I not prompt you enough there? It's Jared's fault. It's Jared's fault. I forgot. Sorry.
Absolutely Jared's fault. It's always Jared's fault. So in the mock drafts, I gave Jared the Guardians pick in each of them, and I'm lazy and I didn't feel like changing any of them when we redid the formats for each of them. So he always had that pick. But a lot of the rumors circling Cleveland was around a few players like Brock Wilkin, Nolan Schonnel, Colt Emerson. Down below, if you read in the mock drafts, I mentioned Ralphy Velazquez, I believe in that last one. Mentioned him among several others. And even if you scroll to the very bottom of the page, there's Cooper Ingle down there. Tommy Hawk, I think, is mentioned, and a few of the other guys too. Some of the guys are just common sense picks, so to speak, to me. Ralphy Velazquez, I think the thing there, a lot of people weren't looking at him for Cleveland because he was generally rated lower down the board than where Cleveland was picking at 23. Frankly, whenever we did the mock, I know there were several times I mocked him to San Diego at 25. So that's kind of where I valued him, in that 25 to 50 range. And that's kind of where he was on people's boards, I think. I'm guessing that's where Cleveland pays him to, is, an underslot deal. And word was Cleveland was looking for an underslot player there. And seems like some players that may have slid to them were gone at their pick. I guess arguably or minus Hurston Waldrop, who did go one pick later. Other than that, I think most of the bats that they would have been looking at were already gone at that point. But I think there was a clear plan when you look at the draft as a whole. And I'll get a little bit more into that as we answer some of the questions later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Velazquez, if he was on the board at the 25, even to the 40 ranges, that's not a huge reach at 23 if you're going to go under slot. And I think they're probably not going to come. Look, they've never given anybody full slot ever. They've never gone over slot. So this is definitely going to be, an under slot deal. Depends on how much. Obviously, we're going to talk about Alex Clemmey, but obviously, he's going to get paid above slot in a second, as a second round pick at 58. But yeah, we probably should have mentioned Velazquez more. And you had him on your Guardians type hitters, and I did kind of an informal list kind of the day before the draft, and I was like, yeah, he kind of seems like a Guardians type guy or guy that I like. I think the question for him was sticking at catcher, and reports were too that I think both Keith Law and Eric Longenhagen had said that the Guardians kind of had their pocket pick draft wise, that they were planning to take Colt Emerson reportedly at 23, and then obviously he wanted to pick ahead of them for the Mariners. And like I said, I don't want to say they pivoted, because it's not like Ralphy Velazquez isn't a good player, but I mean, he was obviously the best player on their board at that point, and that's 99% of the draft, right? Is best player available, like we talked about on our draft preview show, and managing your draft budget too, which they were able to do both with Velazquez. He's their best player on their board at 23 for the money they're willing to spend there. And obviously everything that happened after that dictates where you go from there. But I don't dislike the pick at all. I think it's going to be a good pick, truthfully. I mean, you can never tell. High school catchers don't necessarily have the greatest success rate. And I don't know that Velazquez needs to stick a catcher, though, because is this a guy where I don't want to compare him to Bo Naylor because I feel like that's unfair because Bo Naylor obviously has been a good prospect and he's already in the big league level and a special player. He has a chance to be a special player, and he's really athletic, obviously. But you get into a case with a guy Velazquez where the bat is probably like most high school catchers or catchers in general. The bat is the head of the glove. The question's going to be though, like the bat is going to play no matter where he plays, but do you weigh him down at catcher, whereas the bat might be able to make it to the majors before he can as a catcher?
Yeah, I'll go back to the Guardians type piece that you mentioned. So when I look at players, I look at specific traits and characteristics, and Velazquez matched everything. So famous players, they love players from Florida and California because they see high-level competition. Those are very talented states. They're talent-deep and talent-rich states. So they're facing high-caliber talent all of the time. I think that's why you see them take a lot of players from the ACC this year, too. Yes, these guys fit, but they also faced top-level competition through the year and competed at that high level. And not only competed, but did well there. With Velazquez, young for class, center of the diamond player, yes, there's a safety net with him, which is first base. I think that is the intriguing thing, and I think that was the intriguing thing with Bo Naylor. I threw it out there online, or on Twitter, rather, that he's either Josh Naylor or he's Bo Naylor, and that's saying a lot. And I said in our DMs and I've said on Twitter that I think he's a potential top 100 prospect. Somebody asked me if I think he's Tyler Soderstrom. No, I think he might actually stay at catcher. I think he has a better chance of staying at catcher than Soderstrom did. And to me, Soderstrom, I never projected Soderstrom to stay at catcher. So it was always second base, third base, outfield with him. I think I know where I want Velazquez. I want him at catcher. And hear me out for a second on this, but if robo-umps come in the future, it's going to be about controlling the run game, and I don't doubt that he can do that because he already has a plus arm. So I think it'll be refining some techniques back there. Will he outgrow the position? Maybe. But if he's an offensive-oriented backstop with robo-umps in place, I think that's a whole nother thing with him is there's that extra likelihood that he could stay there because of robo-umps, which are a matter of time before they come, in my opinion. I like the pick, very excited to get him there. I know Emerson had some chatter well above 23 where Cleveland picked. There was rumors that the Chicago Cubs liked him. I know the Diamondbacks were really into shortstops in this draft. They brought a lot of shortstops in. Emerson, from what I have picked up from friends, was a potential pick for the Cubs at 13 if Matt Shaw wasn't there. So to see him off the board at 22, not surprised. I talked up the bat. I said, I think he has a 60 bat. When you're talking about a guy that with a 60 bat and 50, 55 power down the line, that's a very good all-star caliber player, and Seattle bought that too. So.
Yeah, and Velazquez is a guy who has power. Like everyone obviously has been clamoring for power, and the important thing, obviously, remember, is whatever they do in this draft isn't going to affect them in 2023, and it's likely not going to affect them in 2024. I mean, maybe next year you're talking about Andrew Walters as one of those guys, but that's a different conversation to be having. But, Velazquez, we're talking, 5 years down the road with him at best case scenario. Who knows where Bo Naylor will be at there? They took the best player available, and they took a guy who has potential power. They didn't take a guy who is – could hit 300 with 10 homers. They took a guy who can hit a 20, 25, 30 home runs, if it all goes right. Like the rest of their draft with hitter-wise, yeah, it's littered with guys who might hit, 10, 15 home runs if things pan out right. Not Velazquez. If things go right for him, we're talking about a 30 home run hitter. And like you said, doesn't matter where he plays. The bat will follow him. That's the profile on him. And yeah, you're right. The defensive thing kind of matters a little bit less with robo-umps. By the time he is in the major leagues, I fully expect robo-umps to be a thing. And when you eliminate framing, like you see a lot of these guys adjust how they crouch. You've got the one leg technique, you got the frog leg technique, and all of that has to do with better chances to frame low strikes. If you don't have to worry about framing, you can go back to an original catching stance, just very normal.
Yep.
And all you have to worry about is blocking and throwing. So that if that takes away one of the three things you're thinking about, blocking, framing, throwing, if you don't got to worry about framing, then you can focus on blocking, which, who knows what Velazquez will be like. And you're right. He is a little bigger at 6'3" for a catcher. That's kind of big. It's not,
not too
big. No. But, there obviously were reports, too, that he already got himself in better shape between his junior and senior year to be more athletic and to put that kind of vaulted him up draft boards, too, was he kind of changed the shape of his physique between his junior and senior season. So he's a bit more athletic and slender now, which is good for him as well.
That shows a mental maturity and hardworking nature there too, to put in the work to do that from a 17-year-old kid. Yeah, and there's a lot of good reports too, catcher traits with him. Like the Guardians talked about how they valued his leadership traits, how he was a team captain. Just a lot of very good reports on the makeup, how he's had to work for everything. The Huntington Beach is kind of and I don't want to put everybody in the same box because I don't want to generalize, but Huntington Beach is generally an area of, some wealth. And and it sounds like Velazquez has kind of had to work for everything he's earned at this point. He is not necessarily kind of, part of that class that we know of. So he has had to work for everything he's, gotten so far. And he's a hungry kid and has shown those traits. I mean, being a team leader in college, all those or high school, all those things have come back. So those are important traits you want a catcher. I think the report too is he's bilingual, which I kind of laughed at the other day. Like the guy, we'll talk about Johnny Tincher a little bit later, but he's bilingual as well. Kind of funny. The Guardians, I don't want to say they target these guys, but they do like the fact they're bilingual when they don't. We've talked about it. They don't spend any money on foreign pitchers. Like they have Clase and De Los Santos and some other guys, but you're really only talking to a select few amount of pitchers. I mean, there's other teammates obviously that speak Spanish, but pitcher-wise, not a whole lot to communicate with in terms of needing Spanish. But that is funny. Well, that's so they can communicate with the infielders that they signed from Venezuela and the Mexican.
Right. Yes, that's right. Or if they convert to being infielders, who knows? Because everybody's got to play shortstop at some point in this organization. You can't have, one non-shortstop on the field except for, I guess, Josh Naylor these days. So anything you want to add on Velazquez? I mean, I fully expect him to sign. Obviously, the Guardians have yet to pick someone that hasn't signed since 2020 because that was the first year the draft got shortened. So 2019, when the draft was still 40 rounds, obviously they didn't sign everybody, but since 2020, they've signed everybody. So I guess it's just a matter of when, which it'll have to be soon because the deadline has been moved up. So I very much assume we will hear news on Velazquez signing soon. And that for those who are wondering, the value at pick 23 is $3.38 million. So I would probably guess that comes in at 3 or slightly under 3.
I would go between 2.75 and 3 million. Could get a $600,000 discount there. I doubt it's that deep, probably around the 3 million mark. And that's why you see some of the movement later on that they made.
Yeah, so that money is going to go to Alex Clemmey, who, by the way, at 58 is a $1.4 million value, and he is committed to Vanderbilt. But he has already tweeted about how he's going to sign, or he's ready to get to work. His Twitter profile, he says he's with the Guardians and not Vanderbilt. So every expectation he is going to sign, obviously, as we talked about. But for as much as Velazquez is a Guardians type pick, even though it wasn't the most obvious, to most people or some people, because he wasn't the shortstop and, other guys they may have targeted were off the board. Clemmey, I know you had Clemmey as a guy who was a Guardians type pick, but, the general report on him is this guy, has a very violent delivery and he doesn't have plus control. So that makes him a non-Guardians type pick. He is young for the class and the stuff is very good. He can spin a breaking ball. the fastball gets up to 99, but the track record of high school pitchers in that round, and the Guardians don't have a good track record of second round picks, even though every guy's individual. But there are still a lot of traits here where you say, okay, this is not a normal Guardians type pitcher.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll push back on that and say last year in the draft, they showed a bit of variance with guys with control. Jacob Zibin wasn't a plus command guy. Javier Santos Tejada wasn't.
Rivera.
Jackson Humphreys wasn't. Magnus Ellerts was not. Adam Tulloch. So there's 5 guys just from last season that they took that didn't have above average command even. All of those guys fringe average to average. But I heard really good reports on Clemmey coming through the spring, and as the season closed out for him, I think that was the influential thing, talking to a friend who saw him in person and said that he was the best pitcher that he'd ever seen, and that he was basically toying with hitters and putting the ball where he wanted. You may know who I'm referring to, who that friend was that gave me that information.
He did say that the toughest at bat every hitter had was Clemmey. Yeah.
Well, I think he can make people feel uncomfortable, but I'll go to this is I don't think you have to throw 100 when you have his slider. I think he's a good enough pitcher in the mid 90s. Maybe he can dial the effort level down and get some command that way, and then come back with velocity later on if he needs to, reach back for a little bit more. Seeing Tulloch make the jump that he did and Ellerts make the jump that he did, and Humphreys is doing well. I know he's walked a few guys, and then Zibin and Santos Tejada have both been injured. So, we'll say an incomplete on last year's class. But definitely this is a who is the best player on the board, who has the highest upside at this point type of pick, in my opinion. I viewed Clemmey just as I did Velazquez, a guy that I think would go between that 25 to 50 range. In fact, Perfect Game had him ranked 32 and Velazquez 36. I think BA may have had Clemmey at 49. So he was pretty solid in that 25-50 range to me. To get him at 58, there's a little bit of value there. And I think that is either because Cleveland paid him to this point, or because people were concerned, as you noted, the lack of control. But I'll also point out that he's almost a year younger than a lot of the guys in the draft. In fact, I think today is his birthday. So he'd be 18 today, if I'm not mistaken. He was...
You'd be right. Tomorrow's his birthday.
Tomorrow, okay. So he's significantly younger than a lot of the arms. A lot of the preps arm, either 6 months or 12 months younger. That's pretty significant for a prep arm. That's when there's a lot of growth that takes place, is that last 6 months, think of it this way, is these other guys have had a senior year in addition to what he's had. If you looked at what he did this year as his junior year, and then compared that to what guys are doing in their senior years this year, just thinking of it in those terms, there's a lot of growth potential there. So maybe command does come with him. And as we know, lefties are a little bit slow on command usually. Hopefully they're able to develop that. But that upper 90s, touching 100 miles an hour, the slider, the changeup, a lot to like there. There's a potential number 1, number 2 pitcher if everything clicks. That's the thing. That's a big asterisk with him if everything clicks. Even if things go well,
but all high school kids.
But it doesn't come together as they want. Maybe you're talking Sam Henches, or Tim Herron type of arm. If things go somewhat well, they're able to recoup something out of it. But it's definitely a shot at the stars, so to speak, because he could be one. I like the play. It's a big risky play here, but they have a lot of college arms in the system already, and they seem to be comfortable taking prep arms this year, and maybe I'll dip into that here in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, they took some prep arms last year, and they've rated JUCO a little bit too. We'll talk about some of the underrated arms. The pitcher strategy has been interesting the last 2 years because, obviously this all depends on the strength of the class too, right? You can't take guys that aren't there. You don't want to reach for a pick. I mean, yes, you have to manage your budget and take certain guys at certain spots so you can, manage your draft capital. as some teams, are good at that and some teams, are not. And there are teams this year who will not sign all 20, 21 players either because of the way they handled things. And that just happens. But the Guardians do get all the guys in the system, so they do manage their draft capital, and they always spend to the upper bounds of their limits without sacrificing a pick the next year. So they often go over. Clemmey is not a reach at 58. I don't think he's a reach there. It's, looking at track record, it's a high bust rate in the second round. It's a high bust rate with high school pitchers, as always. And you're right. Yeah, he is young for the class. He's only 17, and he's a cold weather arm, too. He comes from Rhode Island, so he's not playing in your typical Florida, Texas, California area. So on one hand, you have the concern about competition, right? Because, he's not playing in Huntington Beach. He's not playing in Florida. But he is not getting the reps that he would get elsewhere. So there's a lot of upside that he just has not even come close to yet. Like how high is the ceiling that he hasn't seen yet because he doesn't have the reps of a California kid or something. By the way, another point on Velazquez too. He turned 18 in May, at the end of May. So, a good bulk of his senior season, he was also 17 years old as well. So, he probably played a month of his senior year at age 18. And like you said, Clemmey did not turn 18, and he doesn't turn 18 until everybody's listening to this podcast. So today's his birthday. So, go on Twitter and wish him happy birthday, I guess. It's an interesting strategy, though, because typically they do go for the generic college pitchers who have good command, and they help guys throw 90, 92 to 95, 96 or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if it's that were their guys not on the board they felt good about. Like, obviously in the second round, guys we thought that they'd be interested in, like Mitch Jebb, gone, Sean Sullivan, gone, Colton Ledbetter, Brandon Sproat, all off the board at that point. So like you said, you take the best player available on your board at that point, and obviously that was Clemmey for them because it wasn't about money with him because he's obviously going to get over his slot. There were some college arms that were there, like Jackson Baumeister, who went the next round.
Yep.
Joe Whitman, Jackson Wiggins, Cade Kuehler, all guys who thought could be a fits. But, if they feel like at 58, if that's a reach, you don't want to reach there for guys that you think are lower down your board. I don't know. It's just the track record, like I said, it's not great. It's a high bust rate, but like you said, the star potential is there for Clemmey. The only thing that's tough to hear about that, though, is that you're talking like a Sam Henches or a Tim Herron. I think Sam Henches was what, like a third or a fourth round pick?
Fourth round pick.
Yeah, so that's not too far off Clemmey. Obviously, Herron was a lot further down the board, but he came from a different kind of program and had some untapped potential as well. But you hope you're not getting a reliever with the second pick because a lot of the stuff you said too. Maybe think of Lenny Torres, cold weather kid, who, if all comes together, is a top of the rotation starter, who is young for the class with great stuff. And, we see where Lenny Torres is at today, unfortunately. Those are always the drawbacks with this type of pitcher, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk. It's a high risk, high reward type of pick for them. I definitely feel a lot more comfortable with Velazquez, and then what they do the rest of day two, it even rounding out day one with their next pick. I don't know if you want me to transition right into him or not, but
yeah, he's the first guy you talk about. It could be a while on Clemmey, but Andrew Walters, we could be talking about him in the majors next season. I guess the real question on Walters is, it's an elite fastball in terms of velocity and the spin of the pitch. So it's got good shape, which is great. And he throws a lot of strikes, which is great. I guess where does the second pitch come from? And I think we have a question on that too, right? We have for our buddy Quincy, he said, what secondary pitch do you see the Guardians focusing on to go with Andrew Walters' fastball? And I guess it's a slider, right? It's got to be a slider.
Yeah, he has a slider. I couldn't tell if it was a curveball or a slider, but all the reports say a slider. I thought I heard someone say that he had a cutter or he worked on a cutter a little bit too, but I didn't find that in any of the scouting reports I read. Just because I didn't find that there doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It may have just been something that he never took to the field with, so to speak. He does have a changeup as well. That's worse than the slider. For me, I don't think a sweeping slider, the left to right motion, would work for him. I would go more of a gyro type spin slider, something that looks more that up and down the north and south approach off of that slider. I think that would play better off of his fastball. I would want something that tight, just like his fastball is tight. His fastball is almost on a straight line, but I think there's a little bit of approach angle with it too, because he seems to have such a compact arm motion, short and quick to the plate. I think that's part of what causes that fastball to ride, or not causes it to ride, but causes it to play up. And that ride that he has when he works in the upper part of the zone with that fastball too, just blowing it by people.
Yeah, if you find, and I think the cutter makes sense too. He kind of has the arm slot for a guy who should have a cutter. And if you give him a cutter, and whatever slider he goes with is kind of your bridge pitch between the fastball and slider. So if you have a cutter, that kind of helps. If your slider is not plus, let's say the fastball is what, a 60 grade.
Yeah.
Which if you're asking about what is a 60 grade fastball, a 20/80 scouting scale where 20 is I don't know, 20 is about just barely better than what you and I can do, and 80 is obviously like a Aroldis Chapman fastball, and it's probably a 60 for Walters just because of the velocity and the carry. If you've got a slider, let's say it's a 45 pitch, if you have a cutter and if it can help bridge the gap in terms of what your slider doesn't do, but it plays off the fastball well, it can make your slider a little more effective. So it wouldn't shock me if they work on a cutter with him. And I think he has the arm slot for it too. I think he has the natural release where he can go for a cutter. So if they can get a slider even to like an average pitch, let's say it's a 50, and I would bet too he could throw it for strikes too. I mean, he was a strike thrower in college. If you can add a cutter to that mix, that keeps him off the fastball, and it gives you, depending on the slider, if it's like you said, if a gyro slider which has more vertical than horizontal, right? Is that what a gyro slider is?
Yeah.
So if you give him a cutter,
sweeper is your one that's moving horizon. Your gyro is the one that's more north and south, so more vertical.
Yeah, so if you give him the cutter, that helps your east to west with a cutter. You've got the fastball that rides up in the zone, and then if you have a gyro slider that's more vertical, you've kind of got all three directions covered, right? You've got your east to west, your north to south, and you got the fastball. So I wouldn't be surprised to add a cutter. And like you said, if the slider works with a gyro slider, it only needs to be an average pitch, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something Cleveland's kind of area of expertise, it seems like, is working on pitches with guys until they get them down, or even trying another pitch, another grip. They keep on working on it. I think he's in a good organization to find that next best pitch for him. But with the elite command that he has, because he walked, I think, 1.5 guys per 9 this year. And somebody told me that he didn't have the command to be a back end bullpen arm. I'm not worried about his command. I'm worried about whether he has that second pitch. I think as is right now, he could probably go into a big league bullpen as a middle reliever. But he has more upside than that. I think, and I threw this on Twitter, that he's kind of what Trevor Stephan was when Cleveland got a hold of him. Lacking this, he had a slider, he had a changeup, but it was when he found that splitter is what really put him over. And his slider even was a 55 on a lot of scouting reports, and I think he had a 40 changeup. That's not quite where Walters is. Walters gets a 60 fastball, so a better fastball than what Stephan had at the time, even though Stephan was up to 98. But, Walters' fastball plays better. He's up to 98, 99. And with that elite command, you don't see many guys with 1.5 walk rate. So,
especially a reliever, right? Usually relievers are the guys that have command issues. So yeah, he could be the first guy in the draft class to make it to the majors if the Guardians see fit that he can help the bullpen next year if they have time to work on the second pitch at that point. Between him and Davis Sharp and who's not to turn to the farm system right now, but Franco Aleman is suddenly striking guys out at Double-A and not walking guys. You got some interesting relief arms, and you always need those guys. They've not done a great job developing relievers internally. James Karinchak's been on the outs lately, and Like Steffen's been good. They traded for Clase. Henches went to the bullpen. You've got Heron, which is good, but you need more. So Walters is a fine pick for money there because you're not going to
Morgan.
There's Morgan. I mean, like we said, you're gonna be slightly under slot with Velazquez in round 1. You're gonna be over slot for Clemmey in round 2. Walters is a good pick for that in round 3, where you're gonna be is he gonna get $1 million? Walters, he's at 1.27 in the third, and it's
a senior.
competitive balance.
He's a senior. I don't remember what is it 1. It's 1.4. I'm gonna say he gets $1 million.
1.2. You think he gets $1 million?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. I think he gets $1 million. I don't see them bringing him down too much from there. I said at one point in time he was a solid second round pick. So this is that range for him. He was going second, third round, no matter what to me, just because of proximity to the majors. Like you said, he's an arm that could potentially be there next year. That's a quick return. I'll invest $1 million in that arm.
Yeah, a guy who can help your bullpen out next year, depending on the role. Yeah, $1 million. That's fine. And again, some of that money is going to go to Clemmey, so you don't judge Walters necessarily on the pick there himself, because some of that gets moved to Clemmey. So you're taking him, and I hate to say a lot of this draft class depends on Clemmey, but it kind of does, just because of how things are going to be filtered. Guardians took his teammate. Walters, that is CJ Kafis, in the third round. They announced him as an outfielder. He's played a little bit of outfield in Miami. I think he played a little bit of outfield in the Cape. And look, he hit the ball well in the Cape. He walked. He doesn't have a problem taking walks. He's supposed to be a decent defensive first baseman. The question, obviously, this is where we start to get to the point of the draft where the Guardians went back to their MO. They took guys who make contact, they draw walks a little bit, and they don't show a lot of over the fence power. So again, this is a bet on a guy who you're hoping finds a little extra pop. He did his senior years last year in college. He found some extra power. I think he added some strength to his frame, and you just hope. I mean, it's hard to profile as a first baseman if you can barely hit 20 home runs. And I think I don't want to put a ceiling on this guy already, but it looks like a 20 home run hitter max at the moment.
Yeah, I think he's 15, 18. If he adds a little bit of strength, maybe he gets to 20. I like him as a bench type piece, somebody that can play a little bit of corner outfield, kind of a Mike Caprice, so to speak, a Mike Caprice, Will Brennan guy. He's above average speed in the outfield. He can play left, he can play right, has a decent arm. Shouldn't be a right fielder all the time, but could help out there in a pinch and play first base. So obviously there's 4 positions he can play because he can designate. He'd be designated hitter too. So I think that's a useful piece. He did well in the ACC too, another ACC talent there. Yeah. And Cleveland got quite a few of them. I think it was like 6 in a row or something like that at one point.
Yeah, it was a very SEC heavy draft. It took Clemson catcher Cooper Ingle with their next pick in the 4th round. Cooper Ingle's a guy you and Jared were all over. I guess the question is, does he have? Well, okay. There's not a lot of power here. Cooper Ingle, he hits the ball on the ground a lot. He doesn't walk a lot. Doesn't strike out a lot, which is good. So he's a very typical Guardians type hitter in that term. Looks like he has the arm to stay behind the plate. What does everything else look like? I guess is the question.
Yeah, I think it's a good hit tool, good contact guy. He's not going to hit a bunch of home runs, as you alluded to. He's not going to drive the ball out of the park. He's going to put the ball on the ground, drive it in the gaps, hit it where they're not, take advantage of a little bit of his speed because he's athletic for a catcher. I kind of said, just to bring back an old name that people may be familiar with, but Tony Wolters. He may be that sort of athletic backstop. I think his ceiling is a backup, and I think that's a good ceiling for him, for Ingle.
Yeah, the 4th round there, I mean, I don't know. It's not an exciting pick in the 4th round, but you see if he can hit enough to hit for average, and if that's enough to play. And
I think this is one of those plays where you're coming in and getting a guy that you like, and get him a little bit under slot, and you're prioritizing a position that you like. You're getting a guy at a position that you like him at. because he does have some positional versatility. He played a little bit of second base and outfield too. So he can play the corners. He can play a little bit of second base. He can catch. He has the athleticism for that. I'd like to see him get a little bit stronger and stay behind the plate myself. That's my opinion, you know. Maybe with a little bit of strength training with some of these guys, they drive the ball a little bit harder through the gaps because they're not guys that are going to hit the ball over the fence a lot.
So it kind of sounds like you just said he is the less exciting version of Cole Carrig. not to be unfair to Cooper.
Yeah, he's not going to be throwing the ball 102 miles an hour.
Yeah, and he's a little more versatile defensively, but he went in the competitive balance B round before the Guardians could get Cole Carrig, and he just signed today over slot too, which was interesting. I like Cole Carrig a lot. Cooper Ingle kind of sounds like we have Cole Carrig at home.
Poor man's version.
Yeah, we have. That's when your mom tells you we have burgers at home. We don't want to go to McDonald's, so you get Cooper Ingle at home instead of Cole Carrig. Not a knock on him. Should be a nice player. I'm going to skip over Christian Knapczyk from Louisville because we could be here for 2 hours if we talk about every pick. Infielder who might not play short, maybe he will. Contact.
I think he's a second baseman, and I'm okay with it. Has good speed.
Yeah,
hits at the 90th percentile exit velocity, so he's hitting it hard where they're not and using his speed.
I have a lot of favorite day two. I don't want to say it's my favorite day two pick. Okay, who was your favorite day two pick? Is it the next guy or is it somebody else?
There's three of them that I really like, and I like Ingle. I like Hawk.
That's what I was going to ask. That's my favorite. Hawk's my favorite pick.
Is a favorite. I think he's a sleeper in this draft class. And then I will go with Alex Mooney, my favorite pick of day two, I think.
So Tommy Hawk, not even on that list, really.
No, well, I mentioned Hawk. I liked Hawk a lot. He's a gamer, grinder type of guy who gets the best out of his size and his tools. Elite level speed, so I think he's a infielder turned outfielder too. So
he is.
I don't want to throw the name out there, but I know a guy that played a little bit of infield, then turned outfield. So
you just had to go and ruin it. Yeah.
Well, there is somebody tied that same name to a favorite player of mine, Petey Halpin. So I had to name drop. Vengeance is mine, Justin.
Yeah. Tommy Hawk, there is some Miles Straw to his game. I know people aren't going to be excited to hear that. Look, the hope when you take one of those guys is they are a little better offensively. I think Tommy Hawk, look, it's probably not a lot of juice, but Miles Straw has not hit a home run in 2 years. I'm gonna say that Tommy Hawk has a little more power than Miles Straw. He is really fast. He plays a good center field. I think Tommy Hawk goes out there looking to disrupt the game. He is a disruptor. Yes. And I feel like Miles Straw tends to be a little bit passive sometimes with some of his skill set, even though it's in there. I don't think that's Tommy Hawk. I think Tommy Hawk is a guy who wants to go out there and impact the game multiple ways. He is looking to be in the action. That's what I like about him. Mm-hmm. He's a guy who I think at the top of the if he hits the top of the order, if things go that well, he's a guy who wants to go out there and cause havoc. And I feel like sometimes Miles Straw is, a little passive. And I don't think that Hawk's going to strike out a little more. I think.
Yep.
I wonder if Tommy Hawk is more like Greg Allen.
More like, just say Greg Allen?
Yeah.
Yes, I said he's not Stephen Kwan because he's more aggressive than Kwan is, but he's that size, that same sort of power production I think you'll get out of him. But he has Ahmed Rosario speed, since Ahmed seems to be one of the fastest guys on the team. I think Hawk is that type of base runner and defender. I don't think he's a natural out in the outfield yet, but he definitely improved this year from everything I've read and heard on him too. Definitely can range all over the place with that speed and fearless out there, like you said. That's what I really like about him, but not my favorite pick, and not because none of that, but I like the guy who went just around after him a little bit more because I had him as a higher rated player, which is Alex Mooney. He's a shortstop at Duke. He was a sophomore eligible player. Some wonder whether he's a second baseman or a third baseman. I think I threw out the name Mark DeRosa as somebody that maybe he becomes that sort of player, somebody that can move around, play a little bit of different positions in the infield. You're not going to get a ton of home runs from him. I think 12, 15 if he hits peak. But here's the thing. He's similar to Tyler Freeman in that you got the positional versatility, but he also is going to get on base, has those contact skills, and he gets hit by pitches. That's an underrated skill set. And I think it's something, that Cleveland takes advantage of those guys that push up that on-base percentage.
Yeah, I like Mooney quite a bit too. He had a so-so Cape, and he played good defense on the Cape. People liked him a little bit. Yeah, I don't know if he's going to play shortstop, but I think he has it in his tool belt. Mm-hmm. I hope he kind of ends up a little better than Ernie Clement. I don't think he'll quite be that, but I mean, he does have the quote-unquote grinder skills that everyone likes. He does have the speed, the leadership, the guy who plays hard mentality, little dirtbag in there. I agree with you. I think
he just turned 21 too, so a younger college sophomore.
ACC talent, and I agree. I think out of all the day 2 picks, he might have the most upside still because he's a guy who could be like a fringe starter, a guy who could, play 100 games a year and really help you out if you utilize him properly, which, that's a whole conversation for another day on this team, right? Can you utilize this guy's skill set properly? And maybe Mooney's one of those guys who will need it, but I agree. And I think he's also an interesting pick in that, look, the value at pick 7 in the 7th round, 218 is 231. So I'm not saying they'll have to go too far over slot, but he's a draft eligible sophomore. It wouldn't shock me if they'll have to go a little over slot to get him either.
You know what? If they went to 5, I wouldn't be surprised. 500,000 to get him. I feel like they sort of flipped picks around a little bit with some of these guys, and probably playing with money to get a few guys that they wanted. Seeing a guy like that, when I mocked him, I think in the 2nd round, 3rd round a couple of times. I think that's where he was rated. I can't remember who had the highest rating on him. Perfect Game or BA had him. I think BA had him at 83, and maybe Perfect Game had him at 65. I liked him in that 75 sort of range. So I think it was a good pick getting him there. You probably overpay him, and then you're probably pinching pennies off of a few of the other guys before him. I think any of the 4 bats that went before him, you can pinch a little bit of money off of. And then you're probably going over on him. But the next pick, Jonah Advinquela, I think is a sleeper in the draft. He's 22, played at Redlands and then Washington State. All he's done is hit. And I think if I remember right, it's either him or Barrett Reebok that hit over 300 everywhere he was at. And I think it was Advinquela who hit over 300 at every school. And then, you have plus speed or better. I've seen plus grades and I've seen double plus grades on his speed. I'll just say he has plus speed. Another guy that you're not getting a lot of home runs from, 5'8" probably, but somebody that's going to get on base and utilizes his speed too, because he got almost 30 steals each season for I think the last 2. I think it was 22, 28, so about 50 stolen bases the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, and he's a guy who was a division. You don't see a lot of guys who are in Division III transfer to Division I. For their senior year, and he was he's a 4th-year junior, but he was fantastic at Washington State. Mm-hmm. Really good, another makeup guy too as well. So the speed is there. We'll see where he profiles best.
He's already 22, so they probably pinch a little bit of money off of him too.
Correct. The other day 2 pick I really like was Jay Driver too. I'm really interested in him because he didn't get to pitch in 2021 due to COVID. They can't, Ivy League didn't play in 2021, so he didn't throw his first college pitch until 2022. Had a little success on the Cape. He's BIP 97 in the past, which is good. Very deceptive delivery, good command. I shouldn't say good command. I think it's average command. Not quite the command you normally like, but he's got a very
he had a walk rate in the 4.5 range.
Yeah, so not fantastic, but there is some Cape success there. A deceptive delivery. I think he's a reliever for a guy who didn't have as much reps as other guys. And this is a place where the Guardians went a lot, which we still have to get to. Is that they went with a lot of guys who don't have a lot of reps, so they feel like a lot of scouts didn't see them, so they didn't. They're better than a lot of teams. The Guardians think that these guys are better than other teams had them rated. They just think that they are underdeveloped to this point in their career. Let's be honest, it's the draft, so a lot of these guys have, quote unquote, untapped potential that the Guardians are trying to find. But I think to this point in their developmental, baseball lives, they should have hit certain checkpoints, but they didn't because of lack of reps. Whether that's, a guy like Jay Driver, a guy like Alex Clemmey, even not necessarily Ralphy Velazquez, and other guys we'll talk about from day 3. And then Jay Driver kind of fits that mold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. He's a drop and drive pitcher. Got that power slider and then that fastball.
Drop, drive, slide, power, all things that are, pun to his last name, right?
Absolutely.
Driver. You meant to do that. Matt Wilkinson, just real quickly, I want to note on this too. So I was looking, we do a lot of, you and Jeff do more research than I do, but I did a little bit this year. And I was looking at Cape Cod League, data leaders, because that's what the Guardians like. They like guys that perform well in the Cape. And I saw Matt Wilkinson's name, and I looked, and I'm like, wow, this guy has struck, had some good numbers in the Cape so far this year. Very interesting. And I went to go look at his numbers. Couldn't find him anywhere because he was playing at a JUCO and, at Central Arizona College. And he struck out a ton of batters there. I'm like, oh, let me go find out more about this guy. And then, I obviously saw his size, and I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to look any further at this because he's whatever. And the Guardians clearly thought this guy misses bats. We're taking him. Nicknamed Tugboat, Matt Wilkinson, 6'1", 270. Reports maybe he's a little bit bigger. He's already signed with the Guardians. He signed for $110,000 out of that 165.3 slot. So he comes in about 55 under slot, which is not a surprise, but a surprising pick nonetheless.
Yeah, not your typical build for a starting pitcher. Not a lot of guys have had success with that. Of course, we've seen some left-handers. David Wells comes to mind.
That's what I was going to say.
Lance Lynn is another pretty big guy. So there are some guys in the big leagues who's had some success. I wonder with Wilkinson, if you get him into the 250 range, just drop 20 pounds, strength and conditioning with him. See if his delivery's better, if his command's better. But he's able to get guys out right now. It's pretty interesting profile. Don't look at the physique that's, with the delivery. Just look at what he's doing with it. And you know what? He may look like he belongs in a city rec league or whatever, but dude's blowing away people in college. And then he went to jump from JUCO to go into the Cape Cod League and not only perform what he was doing before, but to continue to do that in the Cape Cod is pretty impressive.
That's a big jump. That's a great point. To go from Central Arizona College all the way to the Cape and continue to perform, that is a huge jump. Round 11, Johnny Tincher. I don't know what the track record on 5'8" catchers is. It's probably not great. Dude is super athletic, can do backflips. That, to me, if you can do a backflip, you're athletic. I don't know if that's a great way to grade that, but I would say it gives you a little bit of athleticism. Bilingual, as we noted, and also a very well-liked team leader at Washington. This, to me, screams like a guy who's going to be a coach in a couple of years, but we'll see how far this thing goes. He hits some home runs at Washington. The Pac-12 it's a Power 5 conference. It may not be the best conference for it's probably a more hitter-friendly conference, but interesting guy to have in your system for sure. And look, they took 3 catchers. They took Johnny Tincher, they took Cooper Ingle, and they took Ralphy Velazquez. I assume they're going to send Velazquez out as a catcher to start. So, we've been saying how they need catchers in the system, and they went out and they did it. So Tincher should at least have a chance to play some games at catcher over the next several years and see how far he can take this thing.
Yeah, he's a reputable defender too. Considered a average to above average. I think somewhere I read that he was one of the nation's best framers too. So I think that comes into play with all the athleticism, the gamer, the leadership. You got all the skills. I think if he's 4 inches taller, he's a day 2 pick.
That's fair. Yeah, absolutely. That's very fair. We're on the day 3. The Guardians' approach on day 3, they went pitcher heavy. They didn't take any real of the college arms we like. They didn't get a chance to get Sean Sullivan because he went above them in the second round. And to be fair, I think taking him above that pick would have been a reach, I guess. But they missed out on Joe Whitman. They missed out on Tanner Hall. They missed out on Hunter Holland. They missed out on Kiefer Lord, Seth Keener, Connor Halloran, guys we all. Yeah, Coleman Picard. Well, I don't think Tanner Witt is signing. I guess we'll see. They missed out on a lot of college arms, which is disappointing. So day 3, they go with a lot of arms that I want to say are guys who are late bloomers, like Keegan Zinn. Let's focus on him for a second. The 12th round pick. This is a guy who didn't start pitching until his last 2 years of high school. He was a position player before that. And now is just going to strictly be pitching, and who has been up to 96 this fastball, has interesting spin with the slider, has 2 arm slots that he throws out of. There's a lot of athleticism there. The size is good. He has room to add weight. This is like a guy where scouts just did not get out to see him as much as they maybe should have, and there wasn't as much on him as a pitcher because he didn't pitch till his junior year and is now exclusively a pitcher. So it just feels like a guy that, teams didn't see a whole lot of, and the Guardians felt like, this is a guy who could be a late bloomer in terms of development.
Yeah, because as you said, he didn't start pitching until his junior season. 4-pitch mix, 2 different slots with a couple of them, and then very high spin rates. Two of the, I think the slider and curveball both had spin rates above 3,000. So that's some pretty premium spin rates you're getting there. I think his fastball was even in the 2,500 range, 2,600 range, if I remember right. So all of that's high spin stuff. You're getting a guy that played center field and pitched a little bit. Again, they're banking on their ability to develop that. I kind of joked, but there's a lot of truth to it. But it felt like Cleveland was getting guys into the system before they went to college and got messed up, and then they drafted them in a few years and had to fix them. It's kind of like they were preempting that and just, hey, let's just go ahead and get these guys into our system now before they get messed up in college.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, fastball 96, like you said, the slider, 3,000 spin rate. The curveball is up to 2,900, 3,100, and he's got a splitter that's in the high 70s as well. So it's a good 4-pitch mix. I'm really curious to see what happens now that he's pitching full time, and like I said, there's some athleticism there. Just seems like a guy that maybe scouts just didn't, except for the Guardians, didn't get out to at certain points. I don't really know a whole lot about Lake Mineola High School, but it just seems like a guy that teams
and a slender frame too. If I remember right, this is just off the top of my head without looking. I think he's 6'3", 165. So you can add some weight to that, and you assume there's some velocity behind that too. It's just going to take time with him. He was a Liberty commit. I think originally. A JUCO commit, then committed to Liberty, and then obviously Cleveland liked what they saw from him, and are planning on bringing him into the system.
And I also enjoy Jacob Bresnahan, who was the 13th round pick out of Summer High School in Washington, Oregon commit. He is signed for $375,000. So that is what 200 and is it 250?
225, I think, over.
So 225. What is the slot for past the 10th round?
150. So it's 225 over.
So 225 of that will count against the Guardians bonus pool. So anything over 100,000 counts against your bonus pool. So they went over on him in the 13th round. He was about 6 foot 6'2" his junior year, so he wasn't a big kid. Kind of sounds like he had a late growth spurt. His fastball was up into the low to mid 90s as well. He's 6'4", 195. That's really good size. He was an Oregon commit, so that tells me that he had Division I upside, and they got him in the 13th round. And like you said, they got him before he went to college. And I don't know. I'm very interested in him. He's got a high arm, one of those weird arm slots they like, and that helps the fastball play up. Didn't turn 18 until late June. Yep. So he played all of his senior year at age 17 as well.
Yeah, Zinn's young too. All of the prep arms minus Matt Cure are young.
Yeah, Matt Cure, interesting one. Matt Cure was a homeschool kid. Played on the competition circuit, the showcase circuit a little bit. Worked on his family farm, and then was playing in front of some of the bigger showcases. Was thrown in the mid 90s. Has a very short arm slot, can land a slider for a strike. That's 6'4", 230. Maybe there's some conditioning to do with him as well. But that's a guy too who just, again, no reps. Like, you're not playing high school ball. You're playing on the showcase circuit, which is limited. You got to travel. You can't always do that. So a guy who, had he played 4 years of high school ball in Georgia, which is, I guess, the area of Georgia he lived in, didn't necessarily offer great competitive high school baseball. So he didn't go to high school, and he, worked for his family farm. A guy who maybe played 4 years of high school ball, maybe he's a day 2 pick. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking here.
Big school commitment there. Texas Tech commits too. So
right, Division I, yeah. For a guy who barely played, outside of the showcase circuit, for Texas Tech to give him an offer. I know the Big 12 isn't necessarily the pitching haven other places are, but that's still a pretty nice offer. I would know too Zane Morehouse, a guy who bounced around a couple of schools, can throw 97. Control not always great for Zane Morehouse, but when you bounce around a lot of schools, you hear a lot of different coaches in your ear. You kind of get messed up, and maybe a consistent pitching plan like the Guardians can offer helps him. I think he's probably a reliever, right?
Absolutely. He's got starter build, but I think the reliever stuff, really, he throws 3 pitches, but it's really 2 because the changeup is the worst of the 3. That's just a below average pitch. But the power slider, fastball that runs up to 97. I think he's a nice relief arm with command issues. But there's big potential there.
Anybody else on day 3? I don't really want to go through all these picks, but I know you mentioned Brett Reebok, who is lightning fast as well, out of Paris Junior College in Texas. Also a young kid, so I'm not sure anybody else you want to talk about the rest of that day 3.
I'll just touch into all 3 of the last 3 just to give them due time, since we've given everybody else a moment. So Matt Jasek was the ace from Indiana State. A nice video on him that I posted on his piece that I wrote up. I would encourage people to check that out. Good command, low 90s fastball, 90 to 92. Josh Harlow was hitting the head with a line drive. Another guy that transferred, was going to transfer from Mercer to Arkansas next year, but drafted here. He's probably signing. He is in the low 90s up to 94. A friend told me they think they can get 95, 96 out of him. And then Ryan Marhan, who is not the least of the class. He was a prep arm that was rated, I think, 360 at BA. Looking at his stuff, there's some athleticism there. From his delivery, what he has, and his physical build, it reminded me of Logan Allen when he was younger. So maybe Marhan is something similar to that if he develops. I have to quantify that with that big if in there.
All right. Well, let's wrap up with our questions as we get close to the hour mark. Our friend Stacy wanted to talk about the catchers. We did talk about the catchers. Mike Mahoney wanted us to ask who were the ones that got away. Should he just pull up the Cardinals draft? I'm going to say right now, I hate the Colorado Rockies. They took my favorite pitchers. They took Chase Dollander, Sean Sullivan. I know you like Cade Denton a lot. He went there. Isaiah Coupe was an interesting arm from Ohio State.
Yes.
I am so excited to see how the Rockies are going to ruin all those pitchers that I really like.
Yeah, their careers just went up in flames. Sorry, guys.
The Brewers had a great draft.
Tampa Bay nailed like 9 guys. I should just label the pieces Guardian/Rays type draft, because the Rays always pummel the guys off of those lists. The Rays and the Cardinals always do. The Reds had 8 or 9 guys off of that list too. They had a really good draft. They've gotten a lot of praise for the draft. But as you alluded to earlier, I think it's way too early, because who knows how one of these draft classes is going to turn out, particularly with a team like Cleveland who took 5 prep arms. There was a question in there about that too. Did they draft to the strength of the draft? Yes, they did. They went with the strength of the class. I said the best arms would start in round 2. The best prep arms would start in round 2 and down. I felt like that was round 2 to round 7, round 8 for the prep arms. That's where I want to get them. I want to get your top 150, 200 type talents. Some of these guys are obviously outside of that. Those are guys that usually you think are going to end up developing at school. Your Marhan, your Breshnahan. Make sure I'm saying these names right.
We'll find it out at some point. Someone's dad will
you go to school They come back and they're number 3, number 4 starters a couple of years down the line. This puts me in mind of the draft when Cleveland went after Spencer Steer, Austin Martin, and somebody else. But there's like 3 or 4 guys. They were all hitters. They were all middle tier type guys. They drafted them in day 3. They were unable to sign any of them, and they've all become really good hitters. And it kind of feels like Cleveland did that with pitchers this time. And let's hope that these pitchers become what those hitters have become nowadays, because that would be a massive steal for this team to be able to do that with these type of guys. Just hit 1 or 2 of these guys, I think, would be great. So let's hope all of them pan out. We know it won't happen, but let's hope for it.
Let's see. Pat asked us, was this a draft that followed familiar trends and tendencies? And what degree? I don't know. I think the last 2 years, they have kind of started moving into a new direction. They're still taking the high contact hitters, but the pitchers, they are, like you said, they're kind of opening up their window in terms of control. They're not necessarily drafting guys with plus control and trying to find more velocity out of them. But again, that also depends on who's available too, right? You have to, that's the thing too. I think I got lost on because I was so focused on I was looking at like Owen Wild or Jackson Baumeister or Seth Keener, Zach Thornton, Sean Sullivan, like all those guys kind of have certain traits the Guardians seem to have liked in the past.
Yeah. But
the important thing to note too is okay, let's look at Tanner Bybee. Not every college pitcher you take is going to be Tanner Bybee. Okay, that's not always the case. Tanner is a different talent, and because he put the work in, you have to be able to identify guys' deliveries. Like, okay, with his delivery, we see this particular trait where if we change it, he'll start throwing harder and his stuff will tick up. I don't know a lot of this stuff enough to say Sean Sullivan or Zach Thornton or Tanner Hall, where if they do X, Y, and Z with his delivery or his build, he will start throwing harder and he will become a guy who's not a 5th starter, but a 3 starter. So yeah, we all like those guys. We think Cleveland would like them, and maybe they would have at a certain pick. So maybe if that guy slides to the 4th round, like Alex Mooney, I feel like is a guy where maybe they're not taking him in the 3rd round, but hey, he's here in the 7th round. We like him a lot higher. Let's take him here, right? Because he fits us. You're not going to reach for those college arms, but you also have to be able to identify this is a guy we can work with to get more than he's currently showing. So maybe not only do those guys not fall into the range they were comfortable with, maybe there's got stuff in their deliveries that they said, okay, this is a delivery we can't really maximize more out of, so we're just going to pass because he is what he is right now.
You mentioned somebody saying that Cleveland got their pocket picked on a player. I think it was Cole Emerson. I suppose you could say that with Tanner Hall because he went in the 4th round to the Twins, several picks before them. But was Cleveland going to take him in the 4th round? We don't know. We'll never know that now. We know they didn't like him in round 3 because they had the opportunity to get him right there.
Right.
Their board and their assessment of players is much different. Hall is somebody that typically they would have taken in the past, but I think really this was let's let the board come to us instead of us going to the board, so to speak. So that's why you have a run on bats for Cleveland back to back to back, so to speak. And then when it went to day 3, I think it was like, okay, we're light on arms. We need to be creative, and they went with a creative plan into this. They had a strategy in place. They weren't, tripped up by any of this. The whole plan, or the rumors were, they were going to go under slot at pick number 1 or pick 23 overall, and set up the board the rest of the day. That's what they've always done. That's what they did there. I don't think Emerson signs, the same contract Velazquez does and allows them the flexibility that they'll end up later on. Maybe they can make that up at pick 58. You end up with Joe Whitman or Cade Cooler there or somebody like that instead. I don't know, but that's not how the draft played out. So the way it played out is they let the bats, and that's where the depth of this class was. To me, my impression in the 4th round, I'm seeing guys go off the board. Emmett Olson, for one, who went to Miami. That's somebody I thought was like an 8th, 9th, 10th round draft pick, but he went in the 4th round to Miami. I felt like teams started reaching because there was a run on arms. And just like Jared and I said, we both said there's going to be a run on arms around the second round because teams have already been through the draft once through the first round, and they're going to want to start adding arms. And if they didn't get them in round 2, then they went after them in round 3 and round 4. So that's where you had it seemed like a run on arms to me of college arms, round 2, 3, and 4. And Cleveland just sat there and they didn't panic. They let the college bats fall to them. They took them. And then they took a few guys along the way. You know, who knows? Maybe Kyle Scott from Lackawanna College in Pennsylvania becomes a power reliever for Cleveland or something like that. You know, he's got a 3-pitch mix, maybe 4. I didn't see a changeup on him, but an interesting arm. They're going after their development system and believing that it's what Scott Barnesby said to me a few years ago when I asked him about the going after guys with the over-the-top slot. He said, we feel like we can develop anyone, any arm. And I think they've really proven that these last 2 years, going with guys with different slots, different deliveries, not with the same command that we've seen in the past, and willing to take some risk on them guys. You know, I applaud them for that, for not being stuck, because you limit yourself on talent if you are only willing to go after just one type of guys. So then you end up with the same look. And that's one of the things that Tampa Bay thrives on, is all of these arms with different looks.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Yeah, no. Again, and like I said before, we don't know for sure if the Guardians felt like they could maximize any of these arms. And like you said, the draft played out how it did. So, you know, if certain guys they liked fell to a certain round, they had a chance to get them, they might have taken them, but they weren't there, like some of those college pitchers that we liked. It is a different look in terms of pitchers. Like I said, it's guys who have had late growth in high school who, you know, might have been missed by certain scouts, or had they had different coaching, or had they pitched all 4 years, might have been a lot better than they were, or rated a lot higher than they were at this time. So getting guys who, again, like I said, everybody here has untapped potential because they're in the draft. They haven't reached the potential yet, hopefully, but these guys might have a higher ceiling than most people thought because of coaching or late growth, or because they weren't pitching full time, things like that. So it's a different strategy for sure. They're banking on their pitching development and being able to go out and maximize these guys and find some, guys that were underrated by other teams. It's I hate to say it's the Moneyball strategy from Oakland, right? Like, oh, this guy's undervalued because of this, but that's what it kind of feels like. It kind of feels like the Moneyball strategy. Like, you know, This guy wasn't scouted heavily because he was 6 foot his junior year. Now he's 6'4", or this guy didn't really pitch until his senior year. So that's kind of what it feels like. And if one of those guys comes out and looks great, if Jacob Bresnahan becomes a number 2 starter, or Keegan Zinn becomes number 2 starter, or Zane Morehouse becomes, you know, your setup guy, like it's all it takes in these drafts is for like 2 of these guys on day 3 to become major league regulars, that are guys that spend their rookie contract, their first developmental years with you, the before they hit free agency. If they end up having good years for you, that's a win, because that's a hard part of the draft to develop from. Yeah, you need Ralphy Velazquez to become that middle of the order power bat, and that's what they're hoping for. And yeah, you want Alex Clemmey to, at worst, become Sam Henches and Walters. Like, your day 1 guys, you got to have one of those guys fulfill their potential, obviously. But if you can get one day 2 guy and one day 3 guy to have a regular role with you for 5 or 6 years, that's a huge win. And I think they have a guy possibly here. I don't know how it's all going to pan out, but I'm at least interested in their approach here. Like you said, it's different. They didn't take this is no knock on they've had a couple, Tanner Tully, right? Tanner Tully, or Zach, I can't remember his last name. Zach, one of their Zach
Draper.
Yeah, I mean Zach Draper. Yeah, no knock on those guys. Those guys are useful guys because you need those guys in the organization, and they might have futures as coaches, things like that. But the Guardians could have very well taken those guys on day 3, right? Oh, this is an org guy, and some of these guys are going to be org guys. Let's be honest. That's what they're going to turn out to be. That happens. But the Guardians could have loaded up on that type. Instead, they went for, Bresnahan. They went for Zinn. They went for Scott. They went for Matt Kewer. They went for really interesting guys that are different. So I'll at least say I'm interested in how that develops, and it could be, it could flame out poorly. It could not turn out to be a poor draft because of that. But I'm very interested, and I think the approach is is worthwhile to see if it works. I mean, it sucks if it doesn't work out, but it's worth looking at.
There's a lot of projection with this draft class because we're looking at a lot of high school talents, even a few younger, Reebok and Wilkinson, both being 20 years old still. Neither one of them are quite 21 yet from JUCO. Kyle Scott, I think, was a 21-year-old. But those guys that may take a little bit longer to develop before we see anything from them. But the upside is there with them. As you said, Bresnahan may end up being a number 2 starter. We don't know yet. It's so far out. Probably a guy that's not even done growing yet. If he just now became 6'4", 195, maybe he gets another inch and adds another 15, 20 pounds. And with that, you see him throwing 94, 95, 96, from the left-hand side. And then even Ryan Marhan, who's from Virginia, another cold weather state, really.
Right.
Smaller build, but it's an athletic build. And he's got some good-looking stuff. I think, there's a good chance a couple of these guys end up panning out for them, even if it becomes a reliever. That's a win to me to get a guy that's a reliever. But I love what Cleveland did with their first and second pick. Yes, there's a lot of risk there, but I love that they're swinging for the fences because it tells me that, hey, we're comfortable with our development team, even with our ladder picks and what we already have in our organization too. They're not playing it safe. But think of it this way. You potentially walk away with your number 4 hitter for your lineup and a potential number 1 starter. How many other teams can say that they did that?
Yeah, they definitely didn't play it safe at round 1 and 2. They played it kind of safe in competitive balance B round, save some money as well. Day 2, I would say they went very safe on day 2.
Mm-hmm.
Day three is not really safe in general because you just don't know, but they didn't play it safe day 3 either, I don't think. So it's an interesting balance for sure, and it's different than what they've done. I did have one comment too from the Real Fausto C. Real Foster Carmona is asking us questions. I love it. Should ask him how much he was getting from Roberto Hernandez to take his name back in the day. And he made a good point. He said, how does this draft compare to the Naylor, Hankins, Torres, Sandlin draft? And he's right, because Naylor and Ralphie, you got Hankins and Clemmey, Torres, too, we talked about, and then Sandlin and Walters. There's a lot of comparison there, and I would say so far the Naylor pick looks fine. Nick Sandlin has worked out fine. Hankins and Torres, not so much. That's going to happen. So, but look, two of their first 4 picks in that draft are major leaguers and they're regulars. That's a good hit rate right there. And the careers of Hankins and Torres aren't over, and we'll see about Clemmey. But yeah, if 2 of your first 4 picks hit like that, the way that those did in 2018, that's a pretty good hit rate, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we know they're not going to hit all of these guys. Typically, you're doing really well if you get 3 or 4. If Cleveland gets 5 guys out of this draft class, they've done really well. So, especially
now that's 20 rounds and not 40, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Overall, it's a very interesting draft. I'm going to say it's probably not my most favorite draft ever, especially not this year. Brock Wilkins signed with the Brewers for $3.15 million. They got under slot there. Okay, I'm going to end on that note, and I am going to go jump into the lake. Thank you. I really wanted
Justin, who would you have taken at pick 23? You were on the clock. Who you taking?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. We talked about Hurston Waldrop being there. I don't know that I would have taken Farmello. I'm not reaching for any of the second-round guys there. I don't know. I'm surprised Colton Ledbetter came to the second round. But again, if you're going to save money on that first pick, what are you saving it for? I guess Ledbetter would have saved you a lot more money for Alex Clemmey if that's what you really wanted to do. But, Noth is gone. McGonigal's gone. Ty Floyd was there. I'm sorry.
McGonigal was there.
Yeah, McGonigal was there. I guess if it wasn't Hurston Waldrop, then Velazquez is as good as I'm not reaching for Bryce Matthews there. I know you like Kendall George. I was not there on Kendall George.
No, I wasn't high on George either. I like
I like Velazquez more than I like Farmelo. And yeah, I'm not reaching into the second round for any of the second round guys that were there.
I like Lombard. Me, I would have went Hurst and Waldrop, to be honest. I'm always a pitching first guy. I would have loaded up with pitching. Would have looked different there, and then I'd have probably went Cake Cooler at 58 too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Velazquez was going to last until their 58th pick. I think that's the thing too. Is does Velazquez get to 58?
No.
So you're either taking him there, or you're taking Waldrop, and you're completely going a different direction. So, yeah, you're right. I'm with you. I think Velazquez there or Waldrop is a good way to go. I mean, I guess I maybe would have said Ledbetter too, but that's a harder sell for me at 23. There were a lot of people who thought he could have gone that high, but I'm surprised he went as late as he did. So I don't know. Hard to say. The fact that Ledbetter went to the Rays though tells me that maybe he is good, because the Rays love to take Guardians players or like to take players the Guardians should have. So yeah, Ledbetter or Waldrop are the only two guys I would have thought about there. I guess at 23, but it looks like Ledbetter, where he went, looks like it would have been a reach, right?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think he went second round to Miami in the 40-something range, like 45, 43, something like that.
Yeah, 55, yeah.
Was it? I didn't realize it was that far down. I thought it was Miami grabbed him.
Yeah, so.
So Zane Stevens asked a few questions. I wanted to hit his questions.
Okay.
Who from this class will hit the major leagues first? We both said Andrew Walters. Your sleeper pick, Justin?
Why don't you go first?
Day 2, I'll do it this way. I'm not going to do a day 1 sleeper pick. That's not fair. Day 2, my sleeper pick is Jonah Advinquela. Day 3, oh, geez, that's fun. Man. Day 3, I like a lot of those guys. I like a lot of the prep kids there, because you never know what you're going to get. I like Zane Morehouse on day 3. I think he's going to be a guy that walks a ton, but strikes out a lot of guys too. I think he could be a fun arm. He's already 23 years old. I know there's some upside there because he's bounced around a few colleges. I think it was 3 different colleges in his career. But he's got a good frame. I think he can get a little bit stronger. Already hitting 97. I think in this system, maybe he's a guy that strikes out quite a few guys and then walks quite a bit too. Maybe he ends up being like a middle relief role type arm. But I really like Jonah Advinquela. I would say, that's my avalanche of a player. Like my son's making noise over there.
He really likes that pick. Day 2, I'll say Tommy Hawk. I think if he reaches his full potential, I think he could be a leadoff hitter. So that's fun.
Absolutely.
Day 3, I have a hard time picking between Zinn and Bresnahan. I'll say Bresnahan just because he was an Oregon commit, so that he had a little more, college interest in terms of programs. So I'll say Bresnahan. I think there's a lot of upside there being late growth, but I like Zinn a lot too.
Yeah, good picks either way. I think you'd even argue for sure there. Like your pick of Hawk, and I really liked Hawk going into the draft class. One of my favorite players. I absolutely agree that he could be a devastating table setter type of guy. I say devastating because he's somebody I think that's going to steal a lot of bases.
Yeah,
and might strike out quite a bit for a Guardians type of pick, but you know what? I think he offsets that with his style of play. He'll find a way to get on base, and when he's on base, he'll do some damage, and he'll run down a lot of balls in the outfield. So
yeah. All right. Any other questions, or you think we've spent an hour and 20 minutes on the draft long enough?
Yeah, I think we've wrapped up the 2023 draft class, Justin.
All right. So next week, the 2024 draft class. How are the Guardians going to land Nick Kurtz? That's my. Willie has a year now to figure out how the Guardians can get Nick Kurtz. That is his assignment for the next year. If you want to get a contract for next year, Willie, you got to figure out how you can deliver me Nick Kurtz.
I'm still waiting on my sausage egg McMuffin, Justin. So you haven't delivered on that yet.
It's coming. It's coming. There might be a surprise. There might be a hash brown in there too. I don't know. We'll see.
Check in the mail, right?
Yeah, check in the mail. It'll last. I promise. I made it work. Thanks to everybody who read. I know Willie, he wrote like 5,000 words on the draft between the mocks and all the picks and the undrafted free agents and Guardians type players. So Willie, appreciate all the work you put in this year once again. And thanks for coming out of retirement to do a couple of podcasts. Maybe we can Maybe I'll even send you a coffee or an orange juice to see if we can squeeze one more out of you.
You're trying to hype me up with the orange juice now, aren't you?
That's right. Yeah.
You know, the coffee's going to do nothing since I'm like.
That's true. Okay, orange juice or maybe a blueberry muffin. I can get you back on the podcast one more time before the year is up.
You know, that might do something for you. I'm not the muffin eater, but I can buy my wife off with that. So.
Okay. All right. We'll see what we can do. Thanks to everybody who read all this stuff, who shared it, who asked questions. Thanks for all of our listeners. Make sure you are, subscribing on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts and all that good stuff. Share with a friend if you think that they would enjoy this. Please share with a friend. Let them know about the podcast and share with them the newsletter. I'll share that in the podcast description as well. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe to that. You could follow Willie on the Death Machine of Twitter at WILLHOO99. You could follow me at jail_baseball. Again, I always say we're an hour and 20 minutes. If you're not following us on Twitter at this point, you are either not on Twitter or you are some kind of masochist. So thanks for listening. And that's going to do it for this week. We'll try again.